it feels good to see the ball go through the net. But I think, every game, regardless, you're making shots or not, it feels really, really good to have your teammates behind you.
The basketball world is absolutely stunned after Lexie Hull dropped a bombshell that's flipping everything we thought we knew about Caitlin Clark completely upside down. In a shocking twist no one saw coming, Hull exposed details that reveal a whole new side of Clark, her mindset, her struggles, and what's really been happening behind the scenes with the Indiana Fever. Fans are losing it, teammates are whispering, and social media has exploded into pure chaos. What exactly did Lexie say? And why is it shaking Caitlin's entire image to its core? Before the controversy, and before her battle to keep her WNBA career alive, Lexie Hull was a name that meant something. A Stanford legend, fierce, focused, and fearless. She once stood at the peak of college basketball as a national champion with the heart of a warrior. When the Indiana Fever selected Lexie Hull as the 6th overall pick in the WNBA draft, it wasn't just a bet on her potential. It was a belief in her mind, her maturity, and her leadership. They envisioned a player who could think quickly, move smartly, and help transform a franchise searching for its identity. But the transition from college stardom to the pros is a brutal awakening. The speed, the physicality, and the unrelenting pressure of the WNBA test more than just your body. They test your mental strength. Suddenly, Hull, once the heartbeat of a championship team at Stanford, was spending more time on the bench than ever before. Game after game, the minutes faded, and so did her confidence. The cheers that once followed her became faint echoes of what used to be. "It messes with your head," she admitted later, reflecting on the shock of going from being a vital piece of a winning program to just another name at the end of the bench. And she wasn't alone in that struggle. Every player in the WNBA was once the star. Every opponent, every teammate, every rookie, all had led their own teams in college. Now they were all fighting for something new, a reason to matter again. But Lexie's battle went deeper than missed shots or lost minutes. Her story was tied to something that had been quietly unraveling inside the Indiana Fever organization long before she arrived. The team wasn't just losing games, it was losing belief. Years of failure had reshaped the franchise's DNA. Losing had become a habit, a routine that no one seemed to know how to break. The locker room was heavy with frustration, the energy drained, and accountability scarce. Inside those walls, it wasn't about poor shooting or bad defense. It was about something bigger, the loss of purpose. Criticism replaced encouragement. Hope faded into silence. The team needed something or someone powerful enough to shatter that culture. And then Caitlin Clark arrived. Her entry into the Fever wasn't just another rookie signing. It was a shockwave. Suddenly, there was an energy shift, a gravitational pull that no one could ignore. Cameras followed her every move, ticket sales exploded, and expectations skyrocketed. But for Clark, this wasn't about fame or hype. It was about legacy. The same fiery competitiveness that made her a legend at Iowa was now fueling her mission to rebuild the Fever from the inside out. She didn't come to fit into the existing culture. She came to rewrite it. From the very first practice, everyone could feel it. The energy was sharper, the drills tighter, and the locker room louder. Conversations that once skirted around accountability were now being had head-on. Clark didn't just play with intensity, she demanded it. Even Hull, who had seen her share of elite talent, took notice. "It's really awesome to get to know her," Hull said later. "She's grounded, smart, and a lot more mature than people think." But that composure came with an unmistakable edge, an expectation that everyone around her would rise to her level. The breaking point came during an early practice session. After a series of sloppy turnovers, Clark's patience snapped. She stopped the drill cold. What followed wasn't encouragement, it was confrontation. She called out multiple veterans by name, her voice cutting through the gym. The room froze. The rookie the media adored had vanished. In her place stood a fierce competitor unwilling to tolerate mediocrity. Her words hit like thunder. exposing the cracks in a team that had long pretended everything was fine. The coaching staff faced a tough choice. Do they rein her in, protect the veterans' egos, and preserve harmony? Or do they let her fire ignite something the team hadn't felt in years? They made their choice. No silencing, no smoothing things over. They let Caitlin Clark's fire burn. Because for the first time in a long time, the Indiana Fever weren't being destroyed from the inside. They were being reborn. What began as a quiet gamble soon turned into a full-scale transformation. The Indiana Fever coaching staff made a bold, almost reckless choice to let Caitlin Clark's fire burn freely. There was no attempt to tame her, no warning to tone it down. They hoped, silently and desperately, that her intensity would succeed where years of strategies and signings had failed, that it would finally force the Fever to wake up. While some players recoiled from Clark's confrontational style, Lexie Hull saw something different. To her, this wasn't arrogance, it was accountability. It was the type of passion she had lost somewhere along the way. What happened next would shatter everything people thought they knew about these two rising stars. The spark within, how Caitlin Clark awoke Lexie Hull's lost confidence in that tense practice moment when every eye was on Clark. When frustration and silence hung in the air, Lexie Hull felt something stir inside her. This wasn't just another practice, another drill. It was a crossroads, her last chance to redefine who she was in this league. And instead of shrinking under Clark's fire, she made a choice. She would rise to meet it. Where some saw Clark's intensity as overwhelming, Hull saw it as a challenge, an invitation to rediscover the fearless competitor she used to be. She began staying late after practice, running extra drills until her legs trembled and sweat soaked her jersey. The doubts that once clouded her thoughts were slowly replaced with determination. When Clark stayed late, Hull stayed too. Two different flames burned in that empty gym, one forged by fame and expectation, the other by quiet desperation to prove herself again. Soon, something remarkable started to happen. That missing spark in Hull's game began to return. Together, the two built an unexpected chemistry that electrified the court. Clark's vision was almost supernatural, threading passes through impossible gaps. And Hull somehow always found herself in the right place, finishing at the rim with renewed confidence. What began as tension evolved into trust. Coaches noticed. Teammates whispered. The energy was undeniable. Their connection wasn't built on comfort. It was forged in confrontation, sweat, and the mutual refusal to back down. Caitlin changed everything, Hull later admitted, and she meant it. Clark's impact wasn't just about stats or viral highlights. It was energy, belief, a contagious determination that infected everyone around her. Hull's resurgence became symbolic. If she could fight her way back from self-doubt, then maybe the whole team could too. Soon, the Fever began to play differently. Aaliyah Boston started setting harder screens. Confident Clark would find her rolling to the basket. Kelsey Mitchell, once hesitant, began sprinting the court like every play could decide the game. Even the bench players came alive, grinding through practices with new purpose. The Fever's offense, once stagnant and predictable, transformed. They played with hunger, with unity, with a synchronization born from shared belief. But as the wins started stacking up, so did the pressure. The price of greatness success, as always, came with a cost. The media spotlight that once ignored the Fever now blazed like an unforgiving sun. Hull, who had quietly faded into the background in previous seasons, was suddenly front and center. Every mistake, every missed shot, every defensive lapse, magnified, dissected, and judged by thousands online. Fans debated her every move. Analysts speculated about her role. The noise was deafening. But this time, Hull didn't crumble. She took that pressure and turned it into fuel. In one rare interview, she admitted how hard it was to keep up with Clark's pace. "It changes your whole life," she said. Every day was a test of endurance. Early mornings before sunrise, long nights watching film, endless mental battles with fatigue and doubt. Greatness, she realized, wasn't glamorous. It was lonely. It required sacrifices most people would never see. But through it all, Hull's mindset hardened. She was no longer chasing perfection for validation. She was chasing it for herself. The league takes notice as the Fever's success grew. Admiration slowly turned to envy. Across the WNBA, opponents began to resent Clark's dominance and the media frenzy surrounding her. Teams started playing more physically, trying to test her composure. The message was clear. If you can't stop her game, break her spirit. But the Fever refused to let that happen. When Clark took a brutal foul in a heated rivalry matchup, Lexie Hull was the first to react. Without hesitation, she confronted the aggressor, her voice cutting through the chaos, her stance unflinching. Benches nearly cleared. Tension soared. But the message was crystal clear. An attack on Caitlin was an attack on all of them. That fiery confrontation became a defining moment. The Fever were no longer a fragile, rebuilding team. They were a united force, battle-tested, loyal, and fiercely protective of each other. Through Clark's unrelenting drive and Hull's renewed fire, the team had found something far deeper than wins. They had found family. The unspoken rules of Caitlin Clark's world. Caitlin Clark didn't need locker room speeches or dramatic huddles to lead. Her leadership existed in the silence between plays, the sharp glare after a missed rotation, the no-look pass that demanded readiness, the unspoken expectation that everyone would give everything, every possession. Her presence alone set the tone. She didn't create followers. She forged warriors. For Lexie Hull, this was more than a comeback. It was a rebirth. The grit that once defined her at Stanford had returned, stronger than ever, sharpened by the relentless grind of the professional stage. She was no longer just surviving in the league. She was thriving in one of the toughest environments imaginable. But this was only the beginning. The Fever's newfound unity and success would soon be tested in ways none of them could have predicted. When fame meets family, when Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, she didn't just join a team. She transformed it into a global phenomenon. The Indiana Fever went from being an afterthought to the centerpiece of every basketball conversation. Tickets sold out in hours. Arenas buzzed with energy. Every move was filmed, every reaction dissected. For most teams, that level of exposure would have torn them apart. Jealousy, ego, and competition for attention often destroy locker rooms faster than losing ever could. But Lexie Hull saw something different unfolding. From the first day, she noticed how the atmosphere shifted. Clark brought not just talent, but attention, energy, and expectation. The spotlight could have easily swallowed them, but instead of fracturing under it, the Fever learned to ride the wave together. We could feel how much she changed the environment, Hull shared quietly later. But instead of fighting it, we learned to flow with it. Behind the scenes, the Fever were more than teammates. They were becoming family. Shared dinners after long road games. Quiet conversations on late-night bus rides. Laughter echoing through empty gyms. Clark wasn't treated like a superstar. She was treated like one of them. The veterans made sure she never felt isolated, while the younger players learned from her without losing their own identity. That delicate balance between admiration and equality became their secret weapon. As the season progressed, the chemistry between Clark and Hull became one of the most quietly fascinating stories in women's basketball. Hull began to anticipate Clark's movements before they happened. Clark trusted Hull to finish plays others might fumble. Their timing was surgical, their trust absolute. But behind every seamless pass and flawless cut was endless effort, long nights, and mutual respect. Because this wasn't just Caitlin Clark's team anymore. It was their team, built through struggle, tested by fire, and united by something stronger than fame. And together, they weren't just changing games. They were changing the very soul of the Indiana Fever. Then came the storm that tested everything. The day Caitlin Clark was forced off the court by injury. In an instant, the Fever's rhythm shattered. Their offense, once electric and fluid, began to stumble. Opponents crowded the lanes, daring Indiana to prove they could function without their star. And for the first time in months, doubt crept into the locker room. It was like starting from zero again, Lexie Hull later admitted. The team felt adrift, uncertain of how to move without the player who had become their heartbeat. Games dragged. Confidence wavered. The spotlight that had once felt warm now burned too bright. But this was the moment that separates fragile teams from resilient ones. Hull, unwilling to let everything they'd built fade away, stepped forward as the voice her team desperately needed. She reminded everyone that the Fever's strength wasn't built on one player's fame. It was forged through collective willpower. Practices intensified. Communication sharpened. The energy shifted again. Every player began pushing harder, fighting to prove that the Fever were more than just the Caitlin Clark show. Without their star, they discovered something unexpected. They could still win. The ball moved faster. Roles evolved. Trust deepened. And in that grind, Lexie Hull discovered what true leadership looked like, not through speeches, but through action. She showed up early, stayed late, and led by example. When teammates sagged under the weight of losing, she reminded them that setbacks weren't endings, they were tests. When Caitlin wasn't there, Hull said later, "We had to carry her spirit, her fire. That's what kept us alive." By the time Clark returned, the Fever weren't the same team she had left behind. They were tougher, smarter, united. The spotlight still followed Caitlin, but now it reflected off every player around her. Every pass, every defensive stand carried purpose. What began as the story of one woman's rise had transformed into the story of many rising together. The Fever had turned hype into harmony, fame into focus, and pressure into progress. But their journey was far from over. Because the question now wasn't just how they'd handle success. It was whether that hard-won bond could survive championship pressure. Could they stay united when the world demanded even more? Resilience through adversity in professional sports. Resilience is the dividing line between potential and greatness. And for the Indiana Fever, that resilience came to life through two women, Caitlin Clark and Lexie Hull. Both faced adversity. Both were tested. Neither broke. Their journeys were different, but they converged on a single truth. Adversity doesn't define you. It refines you. Lexie Hull's WNBA journey was anything but smooth. Early in her career, she struggled for minutes, battled inconsistency, and endured injuries that constantly tested her patience. During one particularly brutal stretch, she suffered a facial injury mid-game that sidelined her just as she was finding rhythm. But instead of drowning in frustration, Hull used that time to rebuild her mental strength. She began studying the game from the sidelines, watching movement patterns, communication, and subtle details she'd once overlooked. She learned not just how to play harder, but how to play smarter. At the same time, Caitlin Clark was facing a storm of her own. The weight of expectations was immense. She wasn't just a rookie. She was the face of a franchise, a media magnet, and a target for every defender in the league. Every game was a war, and every headline was a microscope. The physical toll came fast, bruises, fatigue, nagging injuries that kept her out of key moments. Yet, what stood out most wasn't her absence. It was her presence. Even when sidelined, Clark refused to detach. She attended practices, encouraged teammates, broke down plays, and fueled morale from the bench. Her leadership didn't come from points. It came from persistence. Hull noticed. She later praised Clark's quiet maturity, saying that watching Caitlin handle pressure and pain with composure reminded her why she loved the game in the first place. It reignited something inside her, a spark of purpose she thought she'd lost. When Hull returned from her own injury, she came back with new fire. She played with confidence, attacked the basket, and found her voice on the floor. Her defense was sharper, her movements bolder. And when Clark returned to the lineup, something clicked. Clark's court vision met Hull's revived energy like two puzzle pieces snapping perfectly into place. Caitlin threaded impossible passes. Hull finished them with precision. Their chemistry